Hi, this is Misha. In this video we're going to kind of look at the history of the Yugoslavian AK. Although actually in Yugoslavia its abbreviation would be AP. Now we did a video about 4 years ago looking at it, but that was a long time ago and our equipment wasn't near as good and so on and so forth. The Yugoslavian guns, really all of them, any of them, aren't, well, for one thing, they're definitely not exact clones or copies. Even more than that, they're very distinctive to the point of not even often being parts interchangeable with their Soviet counterparts. On the table, we have a Yugoslavian M59-66, and this is the A1 variant SKS. They called this the PAP. This is basically semi-automatic rifle. We also have the Yugoslavian Zastava M70. This is a milled receiver gun. And we have a Zastava O-PAP converted into an M70B1 clone. Now, all of these are chambered for 7.62x39. The two Kalashnikovs use standard AK mags. The SKS uses standard stripper clips. Let's start with the SKS. Now this is the later variant with the grenade launcher. And this one also has the flip-up night sights. Some did, some didn't. Yugoslavia, next to China, used the SKS in very large numbers. In the 1950s, Soviet Russia was trying to essentially sell or barter the SKS production line. But while some nations, such as Romania, did obtain it, others, such as Poland, were very resistant. By the mid-50s, the SKS was incredibly obsolete. It was mid-World War II technology. The Kalashnikov was well underway, so on and so forth. So by the late 50s, Russia simply gave Yugoslavia the rights and the production line to the SKS. This was in an attempt to draw Tito closer into the Warsaw Pact, the Russia's sphere of influence. Interestingly, Yugoslavia was the only major successful communist revolution in Europe not to be funded, assisted, or just outright forced by the Soviet Union. Tito really gained authority, control over the Yugoslavian government about as much on his own as anyone does in this modern day and time. Of course, he received assistance from foreign nations. Everyone does. Even America did during its revolution. But Tito was about as independent as it really could get in the comm bloc. So they were trying to basically kiss up to Yugoslavia and get them more into their sphere of influence. So they gave them the SKS production line. They started in the beginning to produce almost an exact copy of a late Izhevsk SKS as the PAP M59. Later they would introduce the 59-66, and the only real difference is the grenade launcher along with its gas cutoff up here sights. There's actually a separate gas cutoff. There's a switch here. Boop. And then you just raise your sights. When the switch is on, meaning the gas is on, you cannot raise your sights. So it's a little bit of a safety, but it is a separate mechanism. We also have a rubber recoil pad. We still have a trap door for the SKS cleaning kit though. Has a blued finish with a polished bolt. It has a fixed 10-round magazine, chargeable with stripper clips. Oops. There you go. Typical SKS safety, pretty much all standard. And this uses a somewhat unique sling of Yugoslavian styling. We have a buckle here that can be easily detached, and we have a much larger spring clip on the front than on a Soviet sling. It's not really any wider, and actually a lot of them are pretty thin, but it's definitely easier to get on and off rifles. They would produce the SKS, the M59 66 through the early 70s, and these would remain in Yugoslavian military service well through the tragic civil war in the 90s. In fact, while I wouldn't necessarily call these often frontline, they definitely saw heavy use, and unfortunately they were pretty popular with the ethnic cleansing squads because they did not need an automatic weapon. A 10-shot semi-auto was sufficient enough. But the SKS in Yugoslavia, much like anywhere else, was still a stopgap measure. It was still a self-loader, no automatic fire, fixed magazine gun. After getting that production line up and running at Zastava, they turned to producing a copy of the AK. Now, by the 60s, Russia had already switched over to the stamped receiver AKM. However, Yugoslavia was working from the original milled AK Type 3. And its first guns would have a milled receiver, similar to this. Like I said, this is an M70. However, the barrels would be screwed in, not pinned, and this has a lightning cut here. The M64, as collectors call it today, would have a lightning cut over here, whereas on the M70 it's smooth. So just, here. The M64 was never really officially adopted by the Yugoslavian military, although it did acquire many as test models, and they do turn up from time to time. So Zastava produced them in pretty large numbers, but they just weren't officially adopted, and they were sold commercially and so on and so forth. They had some other changes too. One interesting change that Yugoslavia, that Zastava made to the Kalashnikov, they put in a last round bolt hold open device, similar to an AR-15. To do this, they also had to make specialized magazines with a trip. Now, the M70 doesn't have it. I'm pulling the mag out, though, because this is a vestigial part. If you look here, on this side, see this cutout? This was originally an M64 magazine, and this is where the bolt hold open would spring up and, well, hold the bolt open. Now, later on, after they abandoned the whole concept, they would just put standard followers in the mags and keep using them. Waste not, want not, of course. This meant, while you did have a bolt hold open, standard Kalashnikov magazines would not work in the M64. Next would come the M70. Oh, they would also make an underfolding version of the M64, often called the M64A. However, these guns never had official designations from Zastava. They were just called the AP at the time. Anyway, next we would come to the M70, which just critter is here. This is a re-weld done by Turbo, done by Matt, many moons ago. So we can talk about it. We still have a milled receiver. As I said, the receiver itself is quite similar to the Soviet pattern with two exceptions. One, we have only the single lightning cut on the right side with a slab side left. Two, we've gone to the pressed and pinned in barrel as used on the AKM, but they used it on a milled gun. Bulgaria and China would also do something similar. There are many benefits to going to a pressed pinned barrel. It's easier, faster to do. It's also easier to replace the barrels. It's easier to headspace. It's just easier all around. There's really no detractions, aside from maybe just aesthetics of people liking the old style of screw-in barrel. So we still have a milled receiver. We have a pretty heavy-duty top cover. It really reminds me more of like an AK Type 2 top cover. It's very thick and heavy on the M64s and the early M70s. We have a bolt carrier, polished, no lightning cut. We have an interesting safety. The tab, there's only one tab on the bottom, and it's very small. But it works. We also have the spring-loaded plunger in the back. I'm moving it here. This is the lock for the dust cover latch. This appears on pretty much all of Zastava's guns, past and present. And that's to go with the grenade launcher. Like the SKS over there, they wanted their AKs to launch rifle grenades. We have a flip-up sight, and this doubles as a gas cutoff. It's automatic, whereas on the SKS you have two separate steps. And then you would screw on a grenade launcher, which I've got over here on this gun, but I'll show you in a minute. Boop. We still have a 16-inch, or 16 and a quarter, I should say, 415 millimeter barrel. Now this retains the medium-heavy profile from the AK Type 2 or Type 3. It is cold hammer forged. Interestingly, Zastava chose not to chrome line their 7.62 39 barrels, be they SKS or AK, past or present again. There's different explanations as to why. The truth is, no one has definitively stated the exact reason. They chose not to. It might have been to get better accuracy. It might have been because Yugoslavia did not have an access to steady chrome to use. We don't know. Anyway, that's what they did. We have flip-up night sights. Whoop. And this one folds down back here. So similar to the SKS 5966A1. They like their night sights. They like their grenade launchers. Otherwise, the sights are very similar to Russian. These would have a ported gas tube, like on the AK Type 3 here, and a non-ported gas block. We have the longer Yugo pattern handguards. If you notice, there are 3 vent holes instead of the standard 2. So they're a little longer, about an inch, which is nice. I think it's nice. We don't have palm swells, but they do taper. They are thinner up here and wider back here, so there's a pretty noticeable taper to them, which is good. Longer upper handguard too. Interestingly, on the M70, we don't have an AK Type 3 bayonet lug under the sight base. We have an AKM style lug under the gas block. The gas block also has an interesting kind of flat front face for the grenade. We still store a cleaning kit under the barrel. And we mount our sling as we would on an AK Type 3 with the swivel under the gas block here and the rear one on the receiver side. Moving back, we have a very unique pattern of buttstock. This is a socket. We do not have a top or a bottom tang as on our Russian AK. This stock fits into a square socket and has one giant screw running from all the way into the receiver. And because of that, we do not have a trapdoor, but we do have a rubber butt pad for, again, grenade launching, same as on the SKS. And the comb and the shape, this is a pretty thick, chunky stock. I think it's very interesting. I like it, but it is different. Finally, the Yugoslavian pistol grip. Early ones could be wood. This is a late M64, early M70 grip. It has the typical horizontal lines and thumb rest here, thumb cutout, but it has a metal, what do you call it there, a bracket or fuller or ferrule, that's the word I'm looking for. But we do have this metal ferrule that the grip goes into. This is a separate piece. It's not part of the receiver. It's just something they did on some of the earlier grips. It's worth pointing out that these are not terribly parts compatible with the Soviet milled AK Type 3. Most of the parts just don't quite fit. The dimensions are a little bit different. Zastava really did their own thing. For example, the length of the receiver is a little different. The length of the gas system is different. Obviously the handguards are different, the buttstock. So many AK Type 3 parts will not fit these. They do still have 14x1 threaded muzzles, left hand, so it takes a standard muzzle nut. They do take standard AK mags now that we've gone away from the bolt hold open. But to replace the bolt hold open, we have the quite famous Yugo hold back follower. This lets you know when your weapon is empty. It also helps with cooling when it's empty. But of course, once you take your mag out, your bolt goes forward, because the only thing holding it is the follower in the mag there. So, better than nothing, but yeah. So they had the milled M70. This was officially adopted into service. And pretty much all previous guns that ended up in Yugoslavian military service were all just lumped in under this M70 designation, even if they had screw-in barrels or other features. And all older M64s usually had their bolt hold-open devices removed so they could take all standard mags. They would also do an underfolding stock version known as the M70A. And they would do a few other minor upgrades and changes, which would lead to the M70B series. And we'll get to that. Now, these early designations, you'll read several different sources as to exact names. Again, most of the military guns were just lumped in as M70, and Zastava didn't do a lot of naming conventions. What they did do, the milled receiver was of course time consuming to mass produce, and definitely by the standards of the 1970s. So like everyone else, Zastava would switch over to a stamped receiver. This is an M70B1. The front end is virtually identical to the M70. I do have the grenade launcher on this one, it just unscrews though. We still have a grenade sight. It's a little different pattern. Also, the gas ports have been moved from the tube to the block as on an AKM. And the dust cover was lightened up a little bit. It's still a heavy-duty smooth dust cover, but more like an AK Type 3. The bolt carrier was given a lightning cut, as was the bolt. The safety has gone through several iterations. They've changed the shape of the little tab there a few times. And the ferrule is gone on the pistol grip. The first Yugoslavian stamped guns would use a 1.0 millimeter stamped receiver. Then they would quickly go over to a 1.5 mil stamped receiver with the bulged trunnion here, as you see. Now this is confusing. Both were known as M70B1, both the 1.0 and the 1.5. So they basically went to a standard AKM thickness stamped receiver, then they would go to a 1.5, more like an RPK. Interestingly too, the rivet pattern in the front is more reminiscent of China than the Russian AKM on these. Although it is very similar to an RPK, true. Just, they did their own thing, they kind of made their own pattern. This stamped receiver is not the same as an RPK stamped. It's just the same thickness, but they have their own designs. This block up here is a little thicker, for example. But this front end is still very much AK Type 3. We still have the medium heavy profile barrel, still cold hammer forged, but not chrome lined. Still have the longer pan guards without the palm swell. As I said, the smooth top cover. So these guns are kind of a hybrid of AK and AKM features, but then again they have a lot of just standard Zastava features that none of the Soviet AKs would have, like the flip-up night sights or the grenade launcher. Again, they were doing their own thing. This would be the version that would be produced in large numbers, the M70B1, and it would remain the standard issue weapon in Yugoslavia up to, during, and even after the Civil War. They would also sell many of these as an export. And they got around the world. They're well known for being high quality guns. They did not actually go to a parkerized or painted finish. They kept on bluing, kept on leaving the bolt carriers in the white, which is an interesting choice. but it works for them. And this is more of a military grade bluing. I wouldn't call it a commercial grade. So my point is, the Yugoslavian guns are often called AKs, but they're really a deep variation. They're kind of like the Chinese in the sense that they started all with the basis of the milled AK Type 3, but then they went in a different direction. They never really made an AKM clone. I just find it interesting in a nerdy way. I find Yugoslavian guns interesting. They were built very tough, to be very dependable. They tried to soldier-proof them, and they tried to add some features again. In addition to making a variation of the AK, Zastava also produced a variation of the Soviet RPK light machine gun. Now, as the same thing kind of went, it was a very loose variation. This is a kit gun here, built back from a kit that still came with the matching barrel from our guns many moons ago, and a Nodak Spud 1.5mm receiver. Now the RPK, they started working on it very early on too. The first ones were milled with screw-in barrels. I think collectors often call these M65s, but they didn't really have an official designation. Then they would move over to the M72, which would have a milled receiver with a pressed-in barrel. And then we would get to the M72B1, which would have a 1.5mm stamped receiver. From the rear back, this is extremely similar to the M70B1. Same exact buttstock, same receiver. The only difference in the receiver, we do not have the spring-loaded detent for the retaining latch, because this was never set up to fire rifle grenades. Same rivet pattern. Takes the same 30-round magazines. Zastava never produced 40-round mags or drums. However, many extended mags came in from over the border from foreign nations, be it Romania, Bulgaria, or Russia. Have the same pistol grip, same top cover. The rear sight is more RPK style with the windage knob. The handguards are RPK style. They're a little different than Russian, but very, very similar. They are not extended, but they are fattened for the barrel. The gas system is pretty much the same. We have the ports on the gas block. The barrel is the biggest difference. Instead of a 16¼ inch medium profile barrel, we have a 23¼ inch heavy profile, but it's a very different barrel from a standard RPK in a few different reasons. For one, we have these very noticeable cooling fins here. Get this thing out of the way. That make the barrel very beefy. And for another, the Soviet pattern RPK has a couple of step downs that tapers a bit towards the muzzle. This has the same thickness all the way to the bipod. It also lacks the secondary ring for the cleaning rod. So it's a heavier barrel really than a Soviet RPK. Front sight still has the night sight flip up, which is interesting, but the rear sight is not. And we're still threaded 14mm left hand. And the bipod is a very close replica of the Russian pattern. So it has some RPK features that are almost identical, such as the rear sight and the bipod. But it then has a barrel that's kind of its own thing. And then from this point back, it's essentially an M70B1, which I'm sure was a good economy for Zastava not to have to produce two totally different receiver types and everything and stock types just to make a light machine gun. They would produce these as the M72B1, again all the way through the 90s, probably even into the 21st century. They made them in large numbers and they issued them and used them in large numbers, both domestically and overseas. Zastava also had a thing for underfolding stocks. This is my NPAP-DF. It's a good example of an M70AB1. This has the 1.0 millimeter Zastava receiver. While you don't see really hardly any 1.0 mil receiver fixed stocked guns, M70B1s, that seems like something they did not produce in large numbers. You do see quite a few parts kits coming out made from M70AB1 underfolding guns. It seems like the 1.0 mil receiver was popular for underfolders. It was lighter, probably just a little more suited for paratroopers and other people needing a folding stock gun, so I can understand that. And they kept making these. They pretty much did underfolding stock versions of everything. That RPK, they did an underfolding version, first with the milled receiver is the M72A, and then later with the stamped receiver is the M72AB1. They would also do a 1.5 millimeter receiver version of this known as the M70AB2. It's quite interesting that while the two stamped receiver versions were both called B1, they did make a distinction between the 1.0 and the 1.5 mil stamped underfolders, AB1 and AB2 respectively. This tells me that they kept them both in production much longer than they did the fixed stock. At least that's my supposition. The front end is the same as on the B1, 16¼ inch barrel. This does have the slant brake. Later production Yugoslavian guns could have the slant brake, although you still see a lot of muzzle nuts. If this was not an import, it could have grenade sights, although they do make versions under the B3 designation or AB3. They have a standard AKM bayonet lug and mounted underbarrel grenade launcher. That's a more recent evolution of the series. So newer guns often would not have the grenade sights anyway, and the cutoff. We have the extended handguards. We have the heavy-duty top cover. The Yugoslavian underfolding stock is quite similar to the Soviet pattern, but it is a little bit different. It's based on the AKMS, so it has dual locking on both sides. They will change these over time. The earlier ones didn't have as many rivets. As time went on, they would reinforce them, making them a little heavier and sturdier. The safety too would change. You see this has a second here. Unlike the fixed stock, these would change in size and shape from the original milleds through more recent guns. This being a newer one, it also has the bolt holdback notch here, which is kind of interesting. I like it. It means when you have on a Yugo mag, when you're held open, you can simply pull your bolt back with your empty mag, put your safety on, there you go, and now you can take your mag out without your bolt flying forward. And then when you put in a new mag, you can just flip this down. Sorry, the safety's stiff on this one, guys. See? So it's a system that works with the bolt hold open mags to make a somewhat decent kind of ad hoc bolt hold open, but a gun that can still feed from standard AK mags. But Yugoslavia would use in their military a number of underfolding guns, as would several other communist nations. They were just more convenient for people getting in and out of vehicles, airplanes. They just had a lot more utility come the 1980s. So Zastava would make a large number of the AB1 and AB2s, especially the AB2s. And they would keep on. Again, we're still not chrome lining the barrel with these, but it's still a very good heavy profile barrel for a rifle. It has the AK Type 3 profile. It's pinned in. You can see this is still a little bit beefier here than on a standard AKM. The train's a little bit heavier, thicker up here where the pin's at. Also we have 3 rivets in the back, a little bit beefier trunnion, thicker top cover. And finally, we have the small one of the series, the M92. This was a latecomer, developed in the late 80s, early 90s. This is Zastava's take on the so-called Krink, the Russian AKSU. They would manufacture this in, sorry guys, what are you doing here? They would manufacture this in both 76239 and 223 for export, 556 NATO. They would not manufacture it in 545x39, however. This is because Zastava never produced 545x39 guns because Yugoslavia never adopted the cartridge. They stuck with 762x39, and in more recent years they're transitioning over to 556 NATO. Like a lot of other communist allied nations, they skipped right over 545. So when they did their AKSU, they stuck with 762x39. And as with the M70 and the M72, this is a very loose copy, truthfully. This has an extension on for a 16-inch barrel. The barrel itself is 10 inches long. We're still not chrome lined, although interestingly, the version in 223 556, known as the M85, does have a chrome line bore. So when they did their 223 guns, they did chrome the bores. Of course, they did them much later compared with the original M59 66s and M64 M70s. Anyway, instead of having 24mm Soviet threads, which are 24 right hand, they used a proprietary 26 left hand thread pitch. I think I have one of the devices. Nope, left it over on the couch. Sorry guys. Anyway, it's just a typical Krink style conical flash hider / booster to give back pressure. We have a combination front sight gas block. Because they really like them, it also has a flip up night sight. We have Yugoslavian extended handguards. These are shorter than on an M70, but they're still longer than on a standard Krink. And they have a very pronounced palm swell, quite similar to the Soviet Krink. This is built on the 1.0mm receiver like the M70AB1. See here? With the underfolding stock as opposed to a side folding. The military versions would be fitted with underfolders. This isn't an original Yugo stock on this one, Serbian Zastava stock. Still have a smooth top cover. We have the rear sight, which is a flip notch aperture, or excuse me, notch, not aperture, just like on a Soviet Krink, but a little bit different. It's still a hinged top cover, but unlike the Soviet pattern, it's not spring-loaded. It just moves freely. Because of the longer barrel, this has a slightly longer gas system than the standard AKSU, so the gas piston's a little bit longer, but still much shorter than on the standard rifle. We're using a standard pistol grip here. And the sling is pretty close to standard Yugo. Still has the buckle, but instead of having the large clip in the front, we have this much smaller clip, and this actually rotates 360 degrees, which is kind of nice. So the end piece is different, but the rest of the sling is the same. Much like how the M72 RPK is built on essentially an M70B1 receiver chassis, the M92 is built on an M70AB1 receiver chassis. Excluding the top cover and rear sight base, which is attached to, the trunnion and receiver and stock and pistol grip are all the same as on the AB1. So again, they're kind of economizing their production line, making things as simple as possible while still delivering a good product. They just need a different top cover, rear sight, and then the barrel assembly is of course different. This is, as I said, the M92 firing 7.6239, M85 fires 5.56. This is often called the Krink, and since it does fill that role, that's a good thing to call it. But as with all the other guns, it is not parts interchangeable, and it has its own distinctions. It's a little bit longer and heavier, and probably a little bit beefier, because these were actually used in more ground type combat and defense than a lot of the Russian AKS-74Us would have been. So that's a rundown of some of the Yugoslavian guns. There are plenty of others. They did a 5.56 version known as the M90, then later a version updated called the M95. There's also, of course, the 8mm DMR known as the M76 and its 7.62 NATO counterpart known as the M77. And more recently they've gone, or at least they're trying to go to, the M21, which is an updated, modernized version. Zastava has a very large catalog. It's actually quite nice and interesting to look through. Before we go away, this is a typical Yugoslavian mag pouch. It holds 4 mags. Smells like someone's basement. 4 mags in here. The front 2 have their own pockets. The back is more of an open plan design with just a little strap on the top. We also have 2 smaller pockets in the front. This one I've got a Yugo metal oiler. It's got a little chain to keep the lid on. Kind of interesting, I thought. They did not use the standard. They also issued a cleaning rope with their guns. I know they also have a cleaning right out of the barrel, but they also have a cleaning rope in the patch. Remember, there's not a cleaning compartment in the buttstock of any of their guns. So this is kind of an older style pouch. It's got a belt shoulder strap. There's several variations of these. They're usually minor, but there are. Got a more modern pouch down here. This is actually kind of an interesting pouch that Arms of America found for me and sent over. Same basic floor plan, but made of a more modern nylon strap, more modern material, synthetic leather here. I've been told this was an export pouch, but it's definitely a more modern pouch used. Still holds 4 mags though. I've got the more updated plastic oil bottle in this one, just because they went from the metal to the plastic. And I still have a cleaning rope in here. So yeah, a couple of Yugo pouches. They also have a version that's similar to this, but these are cut down. The pouch fronts are cut down, kind of scalloped down more, and that's for the 5.56 magazines. I should have brought mine out. I do have one out there, but it looks the same. It just they're altered just a little bit to make sure you can get a hold of the shorter 5.56 mags. The mags themselves for 5.56, the early ones were steel. They would look like small versions of the 7.62 mags. Later, more recently, they've gone to semi-disposable kind of matte polymer mag, which is interesting. So, and they still do the 30-round steel bolt hold open mags. In fact, some have just hit the market over at Apex and other places for a really good price. Well, this is just an overview of the Yugoslavian guns. If you have any questions or comments, please post them below. If you liked the video, please click like. If you haven't already subscribed, well, you know the routine by now. We'd really appreciate it if you would. As always, this is Misha. And please tune in again next time for more, hopefully, interesting videos. We'll catch you there.